Welcome back to The Breakdown with me, NLW. It's a daily podcast on macro, Bitcoin, and the big picture power shifts remaking our world. What's going on, guys? It is Monday, August 4th, and today we are talking macro with an emphasis on what numbers we can even trust anymore. Before we get into that, however, if you are enjoying The Breakdown, please go subscribe to it, give it a rating, give it a review, or if you want to dive deeper into the conversation, come join us on the Breakers Discord. You can find a link in the show notes or go to bit.ly/breakdownpod. All right, friends, welcome back. There is a lot of intrigue happening in Washington right now, and it's a huge point of discussion, with some wondering if we have potentially just crossed the Rubicon. TLDR, in case somehow you missed it, President Trump shot the messenger on Friday. He fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics hours after they reported a dramatic slowdown in the labor market. Trump accused the bureaucrat of political bias, posting, "I was just informed that our country's jobs numbers are being produced by a Biden appointee who faked the jobs numbers before the election to try and boost Kamala's chance of victory. We need accurate jobs numbers. I have directed my team to fire this Biden political appointee immediately. She will be replaced by someone much more competent and qualified." Now, on the one hand, nothing out of the ordinary for this president, claiming political bias within the bureaucracy and calling for firings. The difference here was that Trump actually acted on those impulses and followed through with the threat. Unlike Federal Reserve officials or heads of regulatory agencies like the SEC, the BLS commissioner isn't generally thought of as a partisan figure. They serve 4-year terms which overlap administrations, and there's basically no precedent for an early firing. For many financial professionals, this is a concerning escalation. Peter Mallouk, the CIO of wealth management firm Creative Planning, said, "I can't believe what I just saw. This is not healthy. We can't have a set of numbers come out and fire someone that served under numerous administrations in various roles because you don't like the numbers." Even the BLS commissioner from Trump's first term thought that this was a dangerous move. Speaking with CNN on Sunday, former Commissioner William Beach said, "This is damaging. I don't know if there are any grounds at all for this firing. It really hurts the statistical system and undermines credibility in BLS." At the same time, however, and for the sake of completeness, for some, the credibility of the BLS went out the window a long time ago. The entire post-COVID period has been marked by huge revisions to employment numbers and increasingly questionable inflation figures. There's been a general shift towards imputation of data rather than measuring it directly. Over the past few years, Fed Chair Powell has frequently looked through BLS data in order to get to the underlying truth of the economy. At times, he's outright rejected the numbers due to various issues with how the data is compiled. Still, these were never suggestions that the data was unreliable or biased. It was more a recognition that there are lags and errors involved in the BLS's methods. For the administration, these lags and errors are enough to suggest manipulation. Speaking with CNBC on Sunday, Chief White House Economic Advisor Kevin Hassett said, "The bottom line is that there were people involved in creating these numbers." Now, when asked if Trump is going to be firing anyone that offers data he disagrees with, Hassett pushed back, commenting, "No, absolutely not. The president wants his own people there so that when we see the numbers, they're more transparent and more reliable." Now, the entire episode begs the question, what does Trump actually want to see in the economic numbers? Friday's payroll numbers were dismal. July saw just 73,000 new jobs added, which was well below forecasts. Revisions for May and June removed around 250,000 jobs from the numbers, making those months very close to zero. This makes the last 3-month stretch the worst period for labor market growth since the pandemic. Bloomberg economists led by Anna Wong wrote, "The main takeaway from the jobs report is that labor demand appears to be falling faster than labor supply. The labor market is not solid, as Powell characterized it, and we expect him to revise his opinion accordingly. While a rate cut in December remains our base case, we're seeing growing chances of an earlier move." The market, meanwhile, is seeing an overwhelming chance of an earlier move. Odds for a rate cut in September moved from 37% to 80% when the data was released. Markets are now pricing in between 2 and 3 cuts this year, adding another 1.5 cuts to the baseline assumption. Now, Trump wants rate cuts, but apparently he wants the Fed to cut rates without any signs of an economic slowdown. Justin Wolfers, an economics professor at the University of Michigan and Brookings Institute fellow, tweeted, "The economy is so good that I'm firing the BLS commissioner for reporting numbers so grim I refuse to believe them, and also demanding the Fed cut rates typically seen during a recession." And to be clear, although Wolfers is viewed as a partisan liberal, the outcry has been coming from across the political spectrum. Jason Furman, Obama's chief economic advisor, noted, "I've yet to see a single economist not working for the Trump administration defend this senseless and egregious act." Now, the BLS was not the only institution in upheaval over the weekend. A few hours after the BLS commissioner was fired, Federal Reserve Governor Adriana Kugler resigned effective this coming Friday. Kugler's term was already set to expire in January, so she's just pulling forward that moment. Her resignation letter gave no particular insight into why she decided to leave early. She simply wrote that she was, quote, proud to have tackled this role with integrity, a strong commitment to serving the public, and with a data-driven approach strongly based on my expertise in labor markets and inflation. Kugler was absent from last week's FOMC meeting, citing a personal matter, suggesting that this is more of a coincidence in timing rather than a political maneuver. Now that said, Kugler's resignation gives the Trump administration a lot more leverage over the Fed. Powell's term doesn't end until May of next year, but it was already being floated that the administration could install a shadow Fed chair in Kugler's seat in January. That timeline is now accelerated. The administration could install the next Fed chair as a governor as early as the first week of September when the Senate returns from break. They'll need to wait until May to be elevated to the chair, but the jawboning can begin immediately. Investment manager James Fishback tweeted, President Trump doesn't need to fire Powell, he can just neuter him by naming his replacement immediately. Markets move on expectations. If the bond market believes the next Fed chair will cut rates by a lot, they'll start to price it in immediately, which will send mortgage treasury rates down, delivering relief far sooner than anyone expects. Combined with Governors Waller and Bowman, who dissented at last week's FOMC meeting, the Fed board would be split 3-3 along partisan lines, with Powell being the seventh. All 4 voting Fed presidents this year were Biden appointees, so presumably they won't rubber stamp a rate cut for political purposes. Basically, Trump can install a Fed governor and immediately get his rate cuts, but the presence of a shadow Fed chair should dramatically change the balance of power at the Fed. Derek Tang, an economist at L.H. Meyer, noted, the ball is now in Trump's court. Trump is the one who's been putting pressure on the Fed to do this and that, and Trump says he wants to have his own people on. So now he has the opportunity. Now this is potentially a double-edged sword. If Trump installs a Fed governor in September and starts to get his rate cuts later that month, then he'll be seen to be getting his way. But he's also starting to run out of scapegoats if the economy weakens substantially in the final quarter of the year. Trump, for his part, said that he was, quote, very happy that there's now an opening on the board, stating that he expects to announce a replacement within a few days. Today's episode of The Breakdown is brought to you exclusively by Grayscale. Grayscale is almost certainly a name you know. They've been offering exposure to crypto for over a decade now and offer over 20 different crypto investment products ranging from single asset to diversified to thematic exposure to crypto and the broader crypto industry. They have long been innovators at the intersection of TradFi and crypto, and one of the benefits for a lot of us is that Grayscale products are available right through your existing brokerage or IRA. Now, of course, investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. For more information and important disclosures, visit grayscale.com. Go to grayscale.com to explore their full suite of crypto investment products and invest in your share of the future. Overall, market participants are getting increasingly concerned about the White House interfering with the independent functions of government. Both the Fed and the BLS have a tradition of independence that's viewed as integral to the credibility of the U.S. as a global economic leader. Brent Donnelly of Spectrum Markets wrote, my guess is that Kugler out plus BLS head fired takes gold up to 34.50 this week. It is consolidated enough and we're headed towards a more Turkish style of monetary policy, slowly but surely. A liberal democracy with Turkish monetary characteristics and some Chinese-style industrial policy all erodes trust. Alberto Cavallo, a professor at Harvard Business School, commented, unfortunately, today's firing of the BLS commissioner is not without precedent. 2 months ago, I gave a talk at the HBS reunion about a similar episode in Argentina in 2007. Economist Steve Hanke, who has spent decades tracking inflation crises in emerging markets, said, this is what I call Caracas on the Potomac. This is the kind of thing Maduro does in Venezuela. This is unprecedented in the US. A breathless Larry Summers said during an interview on Sunday, this is way beyond anything Richard Nixon ever did. This is the stuff of democracies giving way to authoritarianism. Firing statisticians goes with threatening the heads of newspapers. It goes with launching assaults on universities. It goes with launching assaults on law firms that defend clients that the elected boss finds uncongenial. This is really scary stuff. Banking expert Chris Whalen put it more succinctly, tweeting, welcome to Brazil. Now, regardless of which country's playbook you most think we're following, making monetary policy and economic data collection political is an extremely dangerous game to play. That didn't stop some from trying to defend Friday's firing on the basis that the BLS was desperately in need of reform. Chamath Palihapitiya tweeted, bottom line is that BLS isn't so much conspiratorial as it is inadequate in its approach. They're all over the place and add little directional signal. They constantly revise and in both directions. The sampling techniques they use are brittle and don't work for a large and dynamic economy like the US. Trump was right to fire the head of the BLS because she ran a critical aspect of the US economic machinery in an unpredictable, haphazard, and sloppy way. There needs to be a new Oracle-like data provider for this critical information. Taking up from that theme, many have been making the case to bring the BLS into the 21st century with various real-time data feeds. In fact, there was an existing modernization effort at the agency during the Biden administration, but the Commerce Department disbanded the board overseeing that initiative at the beginning of Trump's term. And ultimately, even if you think it's reasonable that the BLS needs new leadership and a technological overhaul, firing the commissioner in response to bad data, with the president clearly spelling it out that they were firing the commissioner for her perceived political bias, isn't really the way to go about it. Political reporter Jordan Weissman commented, "Faking economic data for political purposes and leaning on the central bank to cut rates in order to keep government debt payments low, like Trump wants, is the kind of combination that actually brings about hyperinflation." Zooming out, the Trump administration needs to be a little careful of what they wish for. The premise of strong-arming the Fed into rate cuts is that they will also lower interest costs on government debt and reduce mortgage rates. But that isn't necessarily how things work. The Fed only controls the short-term end of the bond market with less and less influence the further out you go. We already saw unusual behavior last year when the 10-year bond rate spiked as the Fed was cutting. An even clearer example is happening in the UK, where the Bank of England has cut rates 4 times in the past 12 months and is expected to cut again at this week's meeting. 10-year and 30-year bond rates are up substantially since the BOE began cutting, and 5-year rates are up slightly. According to Bloomberg analysis, this has actually pushed the average UK mortgage rate up over the past year. The data is less clear in the US, but there are signs we could see the same dynamics being played out. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate hit a 2-year low of 6% in September of last year, and once the Fed started cutting, the mortgage rate started rising again. It's currently at 6.75%, basically flat over this year. 10-year and 30-year bond rates have steadily risen from a local low in September. The risk is that the Fed could cut rates and longer-term bond yields could move even higher, compounding the issues facing the US Treasury and housing market. Some real estate analysts are warning that interest rate manipulation by itself can't fix what's happening in the housing market. Zillow economic analyst Anusha Prakash reported last week that mortgage rates would need to fall to 4.4% to make the typical home affordable to a buyer, but, quote, that kind of rate decline is currently unrealistic. Meanwhile, an average home in New York, Miami, and the 4 major metros in California wouldn't be affordable even at a 0% interest rate. Throughout his feud with the Fed, Trump has been claiming that rate cuts will lead to $1 trillion in savings on interest for the US debt. If long rates head higher once the Fed starts cutting, the only way to achieve those savings is to fund the government with T-bill issuance. As we saw when Yellen started issuing more bills, this has a very similar effect to QE. Spencer Hakamian of Toulouse Capital wrote, "If you thinking Powell cutting the Fed's fund rate is going to solve anything, you don't understand how bond markets work. Powell wrongly cut by 100 basis points this time last year, and all it did was raise the 10-year yield by 100 basis points. Nobody borrows based off the Fed funds rate. That's for commercial banks overnight, not for your home loan. You want lower 10-year yields? 1, remove tariffs and bring inflation down. 2, stop borrowing $4 trillion per year. Everything else is a waste of time." Macro analyst Danny Dayan doesn't like where this is all heading, tweeting, "Today is not the day, but at some point foreign investors are going to ask why they hold US bonds with the current deficit trajectory and banana republic behavior, like the spiraling debt forecasts and firing of data collectors when you don't like the job report. The doom loop will return." Bitcoin analyst Will Clemente responded, "Emerging market Ponzi mode is coming, when, not if." Luke Groman, who's been suggesting a heavy gold and Bitcoin allocation for years, commented, "A few years ago, some economists and investors laughed at us when we said the US economy was heading towards Argentina with US characteristics. This is another signpost on that journey." When a reply guy said that they wouldn't be selling their stocks, Groman elaborated, "Why would you sell your stocks if the US was becoming more like Argentina? Argentina was the best performing stock market for years running in local currency terms. Same thing is happening in the US, stocks rising in dollar terms but falling in Bitcoin and gold terms." Now, ultimately repeating these views doesn't add all that much to the conversation. People like Groman and Lynn Alden have been talking about these risks for years. They now have more evidence that their macro view is correct, but there's no real new signal in this. The signal is that the rest of the world is recognizing that something has gone wrong in the fiat money system. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon was out on a press tour this weekend promoting his bank's new partnership with Coinbase. In an extremely uncomfortable interview, he acknowledged, "It's what the customer wants, not what JP Morgan personally wants." Jordan Weissman, that same economic journalist with bylines in Semaphore in the Atlantic, has never thought that Bitcoin made any sense. However, after covering the events of last week, he wrote, "I'll be honest, I'm thinking of buying some Bitcoin. Congrats to the crypto dudes. You've managed to make your asset more useful by destabilizing the world's most important superpower. Quite the move." Now, I don't think this is exactly how Trump's Bitcoin donors drew it up, but the point still stands that the institutional trust which fiat money depends on is degrading. The point is that this weekend, very serious people of all political stripes claimed that a line had been crossed. Ultimately, we will not know for some time whether this is the first step towards an Argentina-style collapse or just another Trump headline getting blown out of proportion. However it works out, though, there is a strong consensus forming that Bitcoin is an insurance policy just in case. That's going to do it for today's breakdown. Appreciate you listening as always, and until next time, be safe and take care of each other. Peace.